So I've been thinking about what 20 years means. Our 20 years in this fellowship of serving together, of living in community together with one another. What does that mean in this moment? I think to feel the impact of what 20 years together means, we've got to do something really deliberate. And that deliberate thing is we should remember. We should remember. So we're going to do that for the next couple of moments, and it's something my heart needs, and I think it's something that your heart needs as well, to just remind us who we are and to remind us of what God has called us to be and who we are. And so let's do that. Let's remember. Look, do this just so that you can sort of hang this in your mind as we walk through. Let's remember this. Number one, let's remember the storms that we've weathered together. Does that feel weird to talk about in a moment like this? That we ought to remember the storms that we have weathered together? Well, actually, our storms, Houston's storms, have a unique place in our fellowship's life. And I just want to talk about that for a second. Do you know that we arrived on the weekend of June 2001 when Tropical Storm Allison sat down on top of Houston? We arrived that weekend. And maybe if you were living much on the outskirts of Houston, it actually took the news media pictures for you to realize how inundated the downtown area became. The medical center was underwater, and that was our first weekend. Thousands of homes were flooded. And do you know, from that moment till now, I think the storms that we've gone through have been a huge part, listen to this, have been a huge part of forming who we are as a fellowship. I'm going to walk through really fast. I'm going to walk through. Did you realize we've been through 7 major storms together? First, I mentioned Allison. And then, do you remember August and September 2005? Do you remember August 2005? Katrina devastated New Orleans, and Houston began just receiving displaced people by the hundreds of thousands. And then just 1 month later, September 23rd, 2005, Rita came ashore in our region as well. Do you remember about Rita, that it triggered the largest evacuation in U.S. history? Do you remember that? 3 million people went inland. Those are not the primary things I remember about those 2 storms. The primary thing I remember about those 2 storms is how you spontaneously gave yourselves away. You started taking in families, displaced families, and caring from them. Families you didn't even know from New Orleans, but many of you actually took them in. I remember a grow group that took on an extended family from New Orleans of 85 people, and they took care of them for week after week after week. Hundreds of you served day after day in the George R. Brown. Do you remember serving? There were hundreds of us. In fact, our little girls, it was one of the first serve opportunities they had down at the George R. Brown, just caring for people who were displaced by the storm. And so you gave thousands of hours and tens of thousands of dollars just to help others in the name of Christ. And so look at what we were beginning to learn. We were beginning to learn the power and the joy and the fullness that comes from a life that just gives itself away. That's a powerful thing to experience. It's a powerful thing to learn. It fills you up. The storms that we've endured have had this unique place in forming who we are as a church. In 2008, Hurricane Ike, and then remember the Memorial Day floods of 15 and the Tax Day floods of 2016, and then you know what I'm about to say. Brace for it. August of 2017, the flooding that came as a result of Hurricane Harvey. 40 to 50 inches of rain. Never in U.S. history has that much rain fallen in such a condensed time and a condensed space. 300,000 structures just in our region were flooded. And thousands of families around us, our neighbors, thousands of people all around us were flooded out of their homes. And so were many of you. Do you know what I remember most about Hurricane Harvey flooding? You. Do you know while it was still raining, we started hearing about you, Bear Creek Church people, getting out in your boats and finding people who were stranded or sitting on the roof of their house and rescuing them. And then you just started giving spontaneously over $100,000 over and above your regular giving just to help people. You gave tens of thousands more for food and supplies and tangible things. Hundreds of you gave hours upon hours. We tried to calculate that at one point, and I think we just stopped counting at 10,000 hours of you just pouring your lives into people, into our community. And I don't mean you were waving with a happy sign, waving at them. You were mucking out houses and serving food and giving out care packages and clothes and so much more. And look, what we've been through has taught us the worth and the power and the joy of developing serving lives. This is here from, what we're teaching here recently, but look what we've learned to be. We've learned to be people of the basin and the towel. And we have learned that there is so much power and influence in that. And we have learned that there's so much fullness and joy in that. And so if 20 years has meant anything, well, for us, we remember that the storms we've weathered together has taught us so much. But there were many other storms. We were only here 3 months when 9/11 occurred. In 2008, we experienced together, we endured together the 2008 economic meltdown, greatest economic meltdown since the Great Depression of the 1930s, 1929 through the 1930s. Many lost jobs but we were there for one another. The oil and gas collapse of 14 and 15. And then March 15, 2020 is going to live forever in our memory, because all of our lives suddenly became so radically affected, because it was that day that we in our region, we came to the realization that COVID-19 was a pandemic that was in our community and already ravaging people's lives. And so there was economic earthquake, and that jobs evaporated immediately. Thousands lost their jobs in our community. Churches were called on essentially to shut down. Some of you experienced the virus yourselves. You had family members that you cared for. Some of us lost loved ones in COVID wards. But you, Bear Creek Church, you rose up. Do you know, I think in the pandemic year, the spiritual passion and fervency and desire and thirst for God has grown in our church more than any other time in 20 years. Your engagement with spiritual awakening has just been incredible to me. Do you remember in April and May and June, we began gathering online for these very different kind of prayer gatherings, but there was so much passion in those, and we gathered by the thousands, in fact. And your engagement then following and giving and serving and staying connected with one another has just been amazing. And so these other storms in our last 20 years, they've taught us something maybe even more important, and that is spiritual resilience. Don't pass over that. You don't learn spiritual resilience by reading it in a devotional book. You don't get it in a lesson the only way you learn spiritual resilience is going through hard and challenging and difficult times.